This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. Welcome to the Truth Be Told podcast. Our guest today is Lauren Brill. Lauren is a 7-time Emmy-nominated reporter, a public speaker, and a former TV broadcaster. Lauren graduated from Columbia University and began her journalism career working with NBA.com and the WNBA.com. She then served as a sports anchor and a reporter in Cleveland, Buffalo, and New York City. Lauren is also an entrepreneur and started her company, The Unsealed, after recognizing that her own dark secret and her own experience could actually be used to inspire and empower others. We're going to discuss her interesting career history and learn what Lauren means when she says to Unseal Your Superpowers in her latest book. Make sure to subscribe and like this episode for more great content, and to learn more about Lauren, make sure to visit theunsealed.com. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. I'm your host, Dave Thompson. I am here with Lauren Brill, founder of The Unsealed. How are you, Lauren?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Well, of course. Thanks for hanging out with me. I know that our guest just heard a whole bunch about your background and some pretty cool different pathways you had in your career, the highlight of which was in Buffalo, New York, which I know we'll
Yeah,
talk
of course.
about. But maybe most importantly, I guess we can start with when you went to school, you went to Columbia, so pretty good school, good for you, and sociology, and you're studying sports and society, and maybe a little bit more about like why that and how that's kind of related to what you're doing today.
Yeah, so like a lot of, 17, 18-year-olds, I did not know what I wanted to major in. I actually knew from like 11th grade or maybe no, like 5th grade, I wanted to be a sportscaster, and I started like actually pursuing it in like high school. I started reaching out to people and networking. So I knew I wanted to be a sportscaster, but my dad was a big believer in just go to the best school you can get into, major in something generic, and then go be a sportscaster. So he and just doing communications. He wanted some sort of foundation for me, and I was like, all right, whatever, fine. Like,
Yes, Dad.
Dad knows best.
Yeah.
So I got to Columbia, and I don't even think I knew what sociology was when I got to Columbia. Like, I knew what psychology was, but sociology not so much. And so I started just taking different classes to discover my interests. And at first I majored in poli-sci, and then I switched that. Then I like maybe English, and I switched that. And then I took a sociology class, and I found it incredibly interesting. Social justice I found interesting, the issues of gender and just inequality, race, LGBTQ plus, like all of that falls under the umbrella of sociology. And I found it all very interesting, and I was just passionate about it, even though I didn't necessarily know exactly how it was going to apply to my career. And then when I got into my major classes, and you can kind of take out, write all these papers, I was like, okay, well, maybe I could write about how sports impacts society. And I'm convinced that I did really well because teachers just had no idea what I was talking about. Like, who's Muhammad Ali? Like, sounds like a
Right.
pretty cool story. I just like wasn't their area of expertise, but I ended up doing really well. I was really interested in it, and I just took sports because I knew I wanted to be a sportscaster, and applied it to sociology and kind of made it my own. And it gave me things to talk about in interviews. Interestingly enough, I had no plans to do what I'm doing now when I was in college, but I think the sociology background is very, very apropos, even more so now than when I was a sportscaster. Right now, I have an online writing community where people use their stories to empower themselves, but also inspire other people. And we talk a lot about these subjects that plague our society. We talk about inequality. We talk about people's stories, talk about addiction. They talk about social pressures and mental health, and all of these things have a root in the way our society operates. So that sociology background actually ended up being extremely appropriate, even though I did not necessarily know
Yeah.
where or how or when that I was going to use it. When I made that decision, it was just something I was like, oh, this is actually a class I like.
Have you told your dad he was right at this point for what
Oh,
you should go to
you need
school?
to hear
Yeah.
that.
I know it's already
We don't need
recorded.
to pat his, I mean, I remember my freshman year, I was very aware of how fortunate I was to be there. Not just to get in, but just to have the resources to be able to go. I mean, it's an expensive school. Scholarships are very hard. It's hard to come by. I think Columbia is good about financial aid. But yeah, I knew how lucky I was. And I remember being in the freshman dorm room, looking out on the campus up from like the 13th floor and like texting or calling. I don't remember if we had texting at that point, but I remember reaching out to my parents and just being like, thank you. Like, this is incredible. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think even then, I had a level of appreciation for my parents and my dad and the opportunity that I had in front of me, even though I was extremely young and didn't know exactly how that opportunity would impact my life.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, so you mentioned the online platform, which we're going to definitely dig into, but for people listening, you can find on the unsealed.com and explore, and we'll get into that. But when when you talk about college and just kind of like career choices, I feel like the right plan is to not have a plan. That's kind of what I learned, and I don't know what you think about that, but it seems like you set the foundation to do that, is to kind of
I mean, I tell people this all the time. I think a lot of people, especially young people, I think all people feel a pressure to fit a certain mold, to follow a certain path. And part of that is how we're conditioned. We go to first grade, then we go to second grade. And we know
right,
even if we don't like school, we're still going to third grade. And
right.
so then we graduate college and we think, or graduate high school, and we think we still have to follow some sort of path, like, oh, I'm supposed to do this. But I think a much better way to go is just follow your heart. Because even if you don't end up where you plan to go, because your heart led you there. So be
Yeah.
really cognizant of like, do I like this? Do I not? Does this like excite me? Do I want to work on this? And if you do, go in that direction, because I think that in the long run, you'll do much better at something that you enjoy or something that interests you, as opposed to something that you just think is the next step or the appropriate thing to do or what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I like that. I heard once I went to a conference on strengths-based leadership and trying. Everybody's always worried about how do you fix your weaknesses and work on your opportunities. And the message was, find out what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and find a career and a life that you can do that thing the most amount of time,
Yeah.
and excel in that. And so, speaking of excelling, you get out of school and you had really just, at least from my perspective, it seems really cool opportunities. I know you're working for like
Yeah.
WNBA.com and then NBA, and then you're working some major cities and doing sportscasting. How do you go? How did you first get into that? And then what, I guess, high level, what was that experience like?
So I first got into my first job. I was with the NBA, and I got it by emailing every single person that I could find with an NBA email and just being like, "It's not a matter of if I'm successful, it's when. And are you going to be the one to like give me a chance?" And it was a really aggressive email, and I got a call from the commissioner's office and the president of NBA TV. And the commissioner's office ended up passing, because I emailed the commissioner, who was David Stern at the time. He did bring me in for an interview, and they're just like, "You're too young. You're only a sophomore. Like, you have to wait till your senior year," or something like that. But then the president of NBA TV, which worked in a different building in New Jersey, brought me in also, and he was like, "I can give you a part-time job." And
Okay,
so
there you
that's
go.
how I got in the door. And then I started working there. I think it was the end of my sophomore year, or maybe it was early junior year. It was too early for an internship, but apparently not early. It was fine for a part-time job at NBA TV. I was working in the broadcast department, and they're like, "Oh, the .com guys, like they outsourced all their WNBA content. Like they literally pay someone outside the NBA to do it." And I was like, "I'll do it." I had never seen a WNBA game. I'll admit that. And I love the WNBA, and I love women's basketball now, but I just went and looked at the stats and made sense of it and wrote like a preview and review for every team. They loved it, and they gave me a job when I graduated as a writer for WNBA.com. And then WNBA season is only like 3-4 months long in the summer, so then they switched me to the NBA when the season was over. And it was an incredible experience. I was, the youngest one in the locker room, usually the only female, and I built a lot of confidence. I learned a lot, and for lack of a better word, it was fun. Like it was
Yeah,
fun. It was
yeah,
fun learning experience. And I really appreciate too the NBA, because they treated me really well. The bosses there treated me really well. They watched out for me. They helped me grow. They taught me how to be a better writer. So I think it was a very like a family type atmosphere. To this day, if I see Adam Stern, he tells him, "Oh, she's one of us. She's one of us." He would come to Cleveland. I worked in Cleveland when the Cavs kept going to the finals, and every year I'd ask him for an interview, and I'd go through his PR guy, and they would always give me one. I'd be the only local reporter. Sorry, I'd be the only local reporter with a one-on-one interview.
that's
So,
awesome. Yeah,
Adam Silver. And I once called him David Stern, and he's still, oh, Lauren, by the way, it's Adam.
Whoops.
Super nice guy, like just really down to earth, nice guy. And I felt very supported by the NBA and very supported by the community there. And I think that's rare.
So in those roles, and maybe this you didn't experience this, but we have a lot of people, a lot of listeners that are in positions, career positions, where they feel maybe imposter syndrome, or they feel like I'm the youngest person here, or I'm the most junior person in this organization, and sometimes struggle with the confidence to conduct a tough job like an investigative interview or trying to challenge upwards. Did you experience that, especially your first couple years in that space?
I don't think so. But I think that I always had a lot of confidence. You know where I really struggled, and this is where it turned for me. I got waitlisted at Columbia, and I did end up getting in, but I didn't think I was as smart as the other kids that got into Columbia, and I almost didn't go. I actually had a conversation. Maybe I should go somewhere else. Like maybe this isn't like the right school for me. And my brother, who also went to Columbia, who I personally think is like way smarter than me, was like, I promise you, you can do the work. I promise you, if they wouldn't accept you if you couldn't, I promise you that you will fit in there, you will do well. But if you don't go because you're scared, you will regret it the rest of your life. And he goes, I am telling you, I know you, and I went to Columbia, I know you can do the work. So I took a leap of faith and went, and I ended up doing really, really well. And at the end of Columbia, I just felt like, I don't know what I'm capable in life, but I am capable of surprising myself. So to just challenge yourself and put in the work. And I think doing well at Columbia when I had initially been scared and believed I wasn't smart enough to go there, having those 4 years and doing really well there and excelling gave me the confidence to believe that there's what else can I do, right? Like I didn't think anything was too hard or above me, but that's not to say that I didn't have a lot to learn. That's not to say that I came into the job polished. It's just I was willing to learn, and I was listening to people who knew more than me, but at the same time, I did believe I belonged. And I was just I don't even know if I even had that thought process, like, do I belong? Do I not belong? It was like, I'm so happy to be here. What do you want me to do? Like my job in 2008 draft night was to follow around the number one pick, who was Derrick Rose that year. We didn't know that when I was following him around, but we guessed that he would be the number one pick. And I was following him around for 3 days before. And I was the only one who had access because I worked for the NBA. I wasn't an independent outlet. So they gave me access to him all weekend. I was with him when he was getting ready in his room before with his friends. Everyone was in there, whatever that means, laughing. And I went through the whole weekend with him. I went to the volunteer activities, and then I was there when he got picked, and was right down at the bottom of, I think it was Radio City. I really experienced it with him. And my boss was like, how's it going at the end of the night? And it was like my boss's boss's boss. It was like the head of everybody. And I was like, would it be unprofessional to tell you that this was the best night of my life?
Well, what a cool experience. Yeah. So I know you've done a lot of writing, and you continue to write, which I don't know we'll talk about, but in that role, doing interviews, right? Talking to athletes from a variety of sports, but what was that process like? You're trying to get information out of somebody, but you're doing it in a fun, kind of exciting time, but there's also times you probably got to ask some questions that maybe people don't really want to talk about.
So, if you're talking about the NBA, I never had to ask questions that people didn't want to talk about, because the NBA, NBA.com at the time was run by the NBA, and it was almost like you're doing, I don't want to say PR stories, but you aren't doing hard-nosed investigating stories, looking to uncover some dirt on some player. That doesn't behoove the NBA to have that story out there, so they're not going to pay their people to do that. So I was doing easier stories that people did want to answer the questions for. When I got to the NBA, when I got to Cleveland and stuff, but not as much, but I would say definitely Cleveland, where I had bosses and people who are more interested in heavier stories and deeper stories. I did have to report some stories and ask some questions that people didn't always want to hear. And there's also the very competitive to break stories. So sometimes I would ask people for information, and it wouldn't be their best hour. And I've been told to F off, F off, leave me alone. This isn't the time. I'm like, but wait, do you know?
Right. Give me a soundbite first, and then I'll F off. pleasantly.
Yeah, so I definitely, and then, people have definitely been aggressive. And then sometimes when I was younger in the NBA, I was maybe a little nervous. And I think one time I interrupted a player to ask my next question before he finished responding to my previous question. And he was like, "Are you going to let me finish?" Yeah, I think that happened. And then maybe I asked, I remember who it was, but it was the Boston Celtics player. I won't say his name. And then someone else got mad at me because I asked a question they didn't like, and I was like, okay, like whatever,
Yeah.
whatever. I don't remember what that was. I just remember his tone was like, well, but nothing viral, like nothing that was like
Right.
sensational and like, oh my God, how could you have asked that? It was just more of something that like, hey, they lost a game and they didn't really want to like
Yeah.
talk about that aspect of it or whatever.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Like, I'm sure there's got to be times, especially in the sports world, and I know you're an athlete, right? That's something that you did as well
Yeah.
growing up. Like, there's oftentimes a press conference or an interview is after either a great event or a terrible event, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're emotional one way or another. So that's got to be difficult when you're going to talk to somebody after they just lost the big game or they played terrible and then they got to go have, and like right now in the NFL, which I think is crazy, you're seeing these coaches interviewed at like halftime or in between the quarters or doing like a 30-second little sideline interview in the middle of the emotional impact of a game. How, I guess the question I have is like, how genuine do you think some of those interactions are versus just emotional? Here's just a soundbite. Let me get past this press conference so I can get this reporter out of my face.
I think it depends who you're talking to. I think it depends who, like it's very personal. Like some people may really be thoughtful with their press conferences and on their interviews, and other people may be like, I just want to focus on the game, so I want to get in and out of this as soon as possible. And
Yeah.
it may not be. It could be one day. Like we're humans. Some day we wake up and we're in a better mood, and some days we're not. And it really, I think, it just depends on the person, the day, the situation, whether or not they're giving you like a really thoughtful, genuine answer, or they're just giving you the most packaged soundbite, or even some people are just like, no, yes, like they
Right.
don't want to answer anything.
Right.
It just
Well, and
depends.
what that takes me into what I really want to talk about with you is what you're doing now, but this concept that people provide like a one-line response, or they might have talked to you for 5 minutes, but the only thing that was good enough for your 30-second clip on like news at 6 was one sentence or one,
Yeah.
and the community, like the readers, the followers, you make all these assumptions of, all right, this player had this cryptic tweet. What did they really mean? And maybe they're just having a bad day, or maybe
Yeah.
something else is going on, and that impacts how we tell our stories.
Humans are humans.
Yeah.
People are people. They're going to have a bad day. They're going to put something out there that maybe not make sense to you, or maybe it does. Um, my experience with athletes is most of them are really, really nice. And you have a few guys that have done some not so nice things that people stereotype all athletes. And there's just been a lot of things that I've done in my career that were successful and thrived because of the support of athletes and the kindness of athletes and their willingness to open up to me and tell me their story. So is everyone perfect every day? Is everyone like fully transparent every day? No, but there's been so many players that have been so incredibly generous with their thoughts, with their stories, with their emotions, that I'm grateful. And
Yeah.
I think there's more of those than there are not. Timing is a little bit like if you ask somebody a question during training camp, like they're tired, right? Like you
Right.
just, but if you say, hey, your day off is Tuesday, it's middle of the season, do you want to do an interview about X, Y, and Z, something that you're really passionate about? What are their names? Both brothers, they're twin brothers. One played for the Patriots, and Jason and help me out. Jason
I,
is one, the McCourty
I
twins.
know. If you're talking about the Patriots, I'm not helping
I'm
you
sorry.
in recalling any name.
But they
Devin
have,
and Jason McCourty, maybe? Yeah.
yes, Devin and Jason, they both of them it was like their day off, and I was like, can we do a story about like sickle cell, because their dad had the trait
Mm.
and passed away. Their aunt had sickle cell. They have a charity for it, and they were both of them. They introduced me to their families, their kids, and They were so kind, and both of them, it was their day off. The Devin was coming to Cleveland from New England. It may have been his bye week. Like, this was their vacation time. Like, this was their relaxed time. So there's a lot of people who have been really kind and willing to open up, and I think there's more of that than not. So yeah, you'll get a tweet here or something there that maybe seems less genuine or less open, but I think if you look at the greater picture of people, there's a lot of really awesome people who are definitely willing to tell their stories and be generous with their time and their thoughts.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I have to, because I know we mentioned WNBA, so it's important to talk about Caitlin Clark has just helped
Yeah.
to explode the popularity of that sport, which I think is pretty awesome.
I have a lot of respect for Caitlin Clark in terms of the way she carries herself. She's been, tied up into, like last year, she was in that controversy about the Jason Cena sign, like you can't see.
Right, right.
She was so graceful in that, and she could have let like that noise bring her down. Then she comes back and does what she does, and even her and Angel Reese get along so well, and I think that respect. I like that they can be competitive, be a little like dirty talk, and have that
Right,
like aggressive competitiveness, and then still be like, hey, I respect you. Hey, you're a
right.
great ball player. And so I respect Angel Reese. I respect Caitlin Clark. And I think it's athletes like that, athletes who do play with a lot of heart and a little bit of swagger and a little bit of, you don't want to be polite playing sports. I don't want a teammate that says please and thank you to the opponent, right?
Right.
So I think both of them are really great for the sport among many other athletes. And I love seeing women's sports and when female athletes get the attention they deserve. I just think female athletes are so resilient, so incredible, so enjoyable to watch, so enjoyable to cheer for. And I love that other people are starting to see that. I love that so many people tuned in to the women's tournament. And I hope it just continues to pick up steam from there. And I hope everyone who's complaining about Caitlin and Clark's salary, I hope they show up to games. I
Right.
hope they buy tickets because that's the way to get those salaries up and get them to be fair is to keep showing them support and keep cheering them on and buying their jerseys and giving them so much value to the business side of things that they have to honor higher paychecks and when they fight for it they have to do it because they need them so badly because they're bringing in so many people to their games and to their stadiums. So
Right.
I hope people just show up for them
Show,
and
yeah, don't just talk about support, like be the
yeah,
support, I think is,
be the
yeah.
support, show up.
I just watched Pat McAfee had Caitlin Clark and her parents on. It was really cool to hear a story, like see somebody not on the court, but just hear how they are as a person. Like hear her parents talk about raising her, and that is what's inspiring for me to talk to you. Is you've given people a platform to tell their stories and learn more about who they are off the court or off the field or off whatever it might be. And I can let you kind of elaborate on what brought you there, but I've got your latest book here in front of me, Unseal Your Superpowers, which is so cool.
There is actually, speaking of women's basketball, there's a girl in there, Zoe Brooks. It was her father writing an open letter to her about basketball, and she made it. She played for NC State. She was a freshman on NC State, which lost to USC in the Final Four. USC, University of South Carolina, USC went on and won the tournament. But she was like one of the very few freshmen, if not like the only freshman on her team that played and did really, really well. What led me to, so I always loved storytelling. Even throughout all of sportscasting, that was kind of what I fell in love with. That was my bread and butter, finding really cool stories. When I was in Buffalo, I started Athletes for Inspiration, which was a segment every week. I'd find an athlete with an inspiring story and tell their story. And storytelling was always just my thing. When I was in Cleveland, I ended up doing this story about a woman named Gab Cruz. Actually works in sports as well. She was the in-game host for the Indians, now Guardians. But we were at a basketball game. We were at the Cavs game, and we were both sitting in the press box together, and we started talking, and it just came out somewhere in the conversation that she runs this actually, I think maybe the day after we met, it came out that she runs this nonprofit, Love Doesn't Shove. And I was like, oh, there must be a story behind it. And sure enough, she was in an abusive relationship in college. And she started this nonprofit to teach teenagers about dating violence. I thought she had an interesting story. And so I was like, can I do an interview for for our station. And she said, no, like, I don't want my parents to see it. I don't want his parents to see it. I love you, Lauren, but no. And then she called me like 3 months later and said, I changed my mind. And so I was like, all right, let's do it. And we did this interview, and she was emotional and transparent and honest. And her story was so powerful. It went viral, and it was the talk of Cleveland for weeks. It was crazy amount of views. So I asked her, I was like, hey, Gab, how did you go from being so against sharing your story to being so open and so honest and so transparent? And she said, Lauren, I realized it was the silence of victims that allow predators to continue their predatory behavior. And for me, that like a light bulb went off. I unfortunately was drugged and sexually assaulted, raped by whatever definition, federal definition now it would be considered. I didn't talk about it. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone. And then probably I was like maybe 5 or 6 years before this situation with Gab, I started telling my parents and my close friends, but it wasn't like common knowledge. It wasn't just like out there. So after she said that, I realized here I am asking her to tell her story to make a difference. And then I'm silent about my own. So it was really the catalyst to me deciding to tell my own story. And so a few months later, which was still before the Me Too movement, so it wasn't like everybody was talking about this and it was more comfortable, I decided to write an open letter to sexual assault survivors. And I ended up doing something with Sheryl Sandberg, who was working on her book Option B, but then publishing this open letter simultaneously on our station's website. The letter goes viral. I mean, you got like Jordan Poyer, who you know from the Bills, he was on the Browns then, retweeting it saying, hey, we got your back. And other players, Ron Harper, but all these players with large platforms started sharing this story, this open letter, which basically tells what happened to me, but also says what hurts you in life doesn't have to hold you back. You don't know who this happened to. It happens to a lot of us. You're not alone, but even still, you can still chase all of your dreams. And this letter goes viral. I think it was our top story for 3 weeks on our station's website. And for me personally, it was incredibly empowering and freeing. And I felt like the skeleton I had in my closet for all these years was given back to its rightful owner. Like, it's not my skeleton. I didn't do anything wrong. Like, let me throw this back out to the world and give it back to whose fault it really is. So it was very liberating. It was very empowering. And to see all the people impacted by the letter, you're inspiring me. The same thing happened to my mom or my daughter or me. I feel less alone. I was like, wow, this horrible thing that I feel like was a weight for so long is now empowering me and making me feel strong. So I always say that's the moment my secret turned into my superpower, because my secret turned out to be the very thing that I could use to help other people, to inspire other people. So initially I decided to actually leave sportscasting to start this business. Now, I had done sportscasting for 10 years. It got a little bit monotonous. And then I also think I just felt like there's more I wanted to do. I was up for a job as the host for the the New Jersey Devils. I was a big New York Rangers fan. I was a host for the New Jersey Devils. And it was down to me and one other person. They flew me in, and I didn't want the job. And I prepared no end for it. They actually said I was over prepared, but I was so afraid if I got the job, I wouldn't be able to go down the direction of who I truly am and what I wanted to do, and advocacy and storytelling and shedding light on the different issues I believe that plague our society and giving voices to those issues. There was just something more that I was passionate about. And I said, my 10, 11-year-old dream wasn't my 30-year-old passion. What I loved, what I dreamed about when I was a little girl wasn't what I was passionate about and that's okay. And that took me time to accept that. But when I realized that, I was like, okay, so if I don't want to be a host or a sportscaster, I got to figure out what the heck I want to do. And so that's when I decided, I'm going to leave my career and I'm going to create my own company and I'm going to tell my stories and I'm going to build something on my own that's something different. Now, initially, my idea was just to find people with interesting stories and write their stories for them. And that's what Unseal Your Superpowers is, the book that you were holding up. It's a compilation of all these incredibly resilient people who I interviewed them, and then I wrote their stories for them. And then in the book, I intertwined my own story in it. But I had stories going viral. I was like reaching like hundreds of thousands of people through these stories, but I wasn't making much money. So I was like, okay, I gotta like figure out how to like eat. So then I decided to open up to a community and create a subscription. And now the Unsealed is an online platform where people can sign up, share their own stories, turn their secrets into superpowers. We do weekly events with open mics and guests, and sometimes they're inspiring, sometimes they're self-help type of things, and psychologists. We have events every single week where we bring the community together. We have an online platform where people can DM each other, they can respond to each other. Because it's a paid platform, it becomes a very safe space. Anybody who I feel like is not aligning with our values, I can just remove. So you don't have trolls, you don't have people saying really rude stuff. So yeah, it's a really safe space, and it became something a little bit different than I originally envisioned, but it's really amazing just all the different stories you hear. And I still do ghostwrite stories. I haven't done it as much. I actually just recently did one with somebody from Buffalo about weight bias, and how people don't treat people well sometimes when they're overweight. And it was a really interesting story. I learned a lot. And I was actually someone I used to work with in Buffalo, Emily. And yeah, so now it's just a lot more things. We started doing in-person events too. We take the stories that people write for certain prompts, we turn them into books. So there's just a lot to it. The idea is to give everyone a platform to share their story and have a voice, because I felt so empowered by sharing my story and having being seen, being heard, that story being just people acknowledging it, that like this happened to me. That was all very empowering for me. So I wanted to create a space where everyone could have that freedom to be acknowledged in a positive way, for people's stories to be read and heard.
Well, thanks for doing it. And there's clearly hundreds, if not thousands, of people that I'm sure have been inspired by that. I mean, it's pretty to be that vulnerable that you were, to share your story and then turn that into a platform for other people to do the same thing, is pretty crazy. I mean, just looking through the book and reading a few stories, what's also kind of cool is it's not just like people that are listening. It's not just you that's listening that might be dealing with something. People, I mean, you've got Terry Francona, like Major League Baseball coaching legend. You've got Gretchen Carlson. Obviously, people know her story in the Me Too movement and kind of the catalyst to that. You've got the WNBA players. Del Reed, who's kind of the he doesn't want to call himself the founder, but he was really the catalyst to the Bills Mafia nonprofit group. Jeffrey Deskovich, you got somebody who's been wrongfully convicted. You've got other professional athletes and people. Everybody's just people, and everybody's experienced some type of moment or experience in their life where they felt vulnerable or uncomfortable sharing the story. And these are all really cool letters where they're able to express to the community or to somebody specific what that was like. And what's that, I guess, feedback or reward been like, of how have people that once they've expressed it, what do they tell you afterwards?
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for making me feel heard. Thank you for listening. Um, there's this story isn't in the book, but there was one story I did with a guy who played for the Browns, and he wrote about the importance of sharing. He wrote to kids about the importance of talking about your feelings. His feelings were buried for a long time. His brother, he had twin brothers. His brothers were buried for a long time. And we wrote this story, and it was about mental health and depression. And he wasn't doing well, but I didn't realize to what extent. But after we did this letter, he called me up, and he was just like, thank you. Like, I went to the gym today, and someone came up to me and gave me a hug. And he was so appreciative. And he ended up passing away a few months later. And I realized that the story was so meaningful for him, because I do believe he felt like if he would have opened up younger, his life would have turned out differently. And I think that he was able to give the gift to others that he wasn't able to give to himself. And I've had so many moments. And he told me, I was like, I had just started my company when I did this letter. Did you hear my dog in the background?
That's okay. It's all part of the process. The
Okay,
dog should write a letter.
if you guys heard my dog, that's my assistant. He's usually pretty quiet, but he's like coughing up something back there. Um, so there's just been so many moments of really people feeling that same freedom that I felt when I wrote my letter. We did a letter with a 16-year-old girl with her father's permission. He was on the phone when we did the interview about having a stutter. And we wrote basically, if you meet me, be nice or you meet someone like me, be nice because we've been through a lot and people judge us. And I'm strong enough now and that doesn't bother me, but it's still nice to be nice. And she puts this letter out there. It goes viral in her community. And her father calls me 9 months later. I don't have the same child anymore. Like this child is more confident. She believes in herself. She doesn't let things bother her as much. She ended up going off to college. She was also a twin, away from her twin sister. And he goes, I don't know if she would have done that. The letter was like a coming out for her of like owning her story and instead of feeling like she had to hide behind it. And so it's things like that. It's just really powerful and meaningful to people to own their story and also to see your story on paper, to be like, oh, like I've been through all this and I came out on the other side.
Right.
We did a story with a WNBA player who lost her father. And after she lost her father, she was having a real hard time playing at the same level she was. And she wrote this letter basically saying, I'm not going to give up and I'm going to keep fighting. And she wrote about her dad. And after that, she did. And she had left the WNBA because she had a few rough seasons or maybe a rough season, went and played in another country. And then she came back and then she just like won a WNBA title. Like, it's really cool to be a part of these people's journey in a special way, in a meaningful way. There's a coach in Cleveland we've written about twice in letters. He called me up and is like, I'm crying. He's one of has more players in the NFL than like any other coach. There's a letter in the book I wrote to my boyfriend from high school. It was my first boyfriend. We dated in 9th grade. We were like opposites, like bad boy, in trouble, getting suspended, like Miss Goody Two Shoes in all honors classes, like why aren't you home doing your homework? Like totally opposites. But I thought he was a really nice person and he was really sweet to me and he had a soft spot to him and he still does. And since over the last 20 years, we haven't seen each other a whole lot at all. And he's been in a lot of trouble. He's been in and out of jail. And I wrote a letter to him basically saying, I know who the real you is in there. And I know you've been through some stuff that has maybe affected your decision making, but I know there's a good person in there. And I told this story of how this girl from our school was getting picked on and he was the one to like protect her. And I've heard lots of stories about that with him. How he always stuck up for the little guy and people always backed down from him. And I sent him this letter. Actually, I don't know if I sent it to him or I read it to him on the phone, but he's on the phone with me crying saying, can I send this to my mother? I was like, okay, some gangster you are.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, it's when you can actually know or remember even who you are, right, as a person, instead
Yeah.
of being judged by our weakest moments or these poor decisions. It's like, who are you as a person? That helps
Yeah.
extract that.
People are complicated. There's
Yeah.
we can be innocent and wild. We can be bad and loving. Like we're not all of one thing. Nobody is. And I think the fact that I could still see his heart despite his like rap sheet, like
Right.
he
Right.
really appreciated that. And
Right.
it really meant something to him. And yeah, I mean, I try to look for the humanity in everyone and also let everyone know that there's humanity in everyone. And
Yeah.
a lot of times there's more than meets the eye. Like people's lives, the reason they take ugly paths um, come from a very vulnerable place, their decisions. Like come from a place of like something maybe happened with a parent or something. I did a story on a guy who, went to jail for something horrible and then it came out 70 years later, at the end of his life that he was sexually abused as a child and was poorly coping with that. So
Yeah.
I believe, and some people may think I'm naive because of this, that most people are good, and most people do have a heart in them and a humanity. There is mental illness and extremes, but I believe most people are good, and I think if you believe in their good and you believe in their heart, they'll show you more of it.
I think that's great. You reference in the book. You have a quote, so I'm going to butcher it because I don't have it written down, but it stuck with me. The concept is kind of identifying what the enemy is, but you said the best way to figure out like how to defend it or attack it or whatever it is talk to the people who were affected by it.
This was in the chapter about like race and equality. Yeah, like
Yes.
what do I know about racism, right? Like I can learn in books and I can have some, knowledge of that it exists. But like unless you really talk to someone and listen to them and ask them like how do we make this better? The person going through something like this, because you don't walk through the world and that their shoes. You don't know what it's like for to be a female rape victim and feel vulnerable all the time because you're like a big strong guy. But like if I said, hey, you know what, Dave, if you could just walk me to my car, that would be so helpful. You'd be like, sure, but you wouldn't necessarily know that that would be so helpful unless I tell you. Just listening to people and what they need and what their situation exposes them to or how it affects them, and then like then making a decision on how to help is really beneficial. I think the only way you can help people is to really listen to what they need.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, and to grow as a society, to learn is to learn by the people who are actually affected by it.
I think
If
that's
you wanted
great.
to fix, sexual violence against women, you wouldn't if you put together a group of men, it probably isn't as effective. If you want to figure out how to make it so there's less discrimination against LGBTQ plus, probably wouldn't be super effective to put a bunch of straight people together to fix the problem because
Right.
you don't see it through the lens of somebody actually going through it.
I think that's and it's so simple but so often a failure. I went to a conference that had a panel on diversity and it was all white men on the stage. And I was like, what? But what you just said, I got a chance, the opportunity to go speak with one of my colleagues at a conference on ending violence against women. And it was all about sexual assault survivors and domestic violence. And what was interesting, we go and we're presenting on investigative interviewing and how do you make sure that you're not misclassifying a survivor as being deceptive based off of their emotional response. But the most powerful after all the events that week and all the sessions I sat through was listening to survivors talk about their actual experience on the other side. Because we can come up with what the right thing is to do, but you don't know unless you actually talk to somebody who's been in that position.
And I think there's like this misunderstanding that the reason we should hire diversity and all this other stuff is because everyone deserves an opportunity. And yes, there is that, but like it's super valuable to have diversity as a company, as a business owner, because of diversity of thought. You get diverse thinking. So maybe like there's something that I see it this way because this is my life, but like somebody who has different life experiences sees it from this direction, and that helps us solve problems. Like diversity of thought is so valuable. It's not charitable, it's valuable.
Right. Well, one of the gentlemen in the book that we talked about, Jeffrey Deskovich, so he talks about his experience falsely confessing to a crime when he was at 16. He was a
Yeah.
juvenile, I forget his age.
Yeah, I think he was 16 and convicted at 17.
Yes. So I've had the really just humbling opportunity to work with a lot of people who've been wrongfully convicted. And so when we're out trying to teach investigators or talk to policy lawmakers on here's what we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen, most people think, well, I would never confess to something that I didn't do. Like I would never do that. But then when you talk to somebody like Jeff or Marty Tankliff or any of these people who've been in a position where that's happened, you see the completely different perspective of what it's like to stand the other side of an interview and how you can be driven to literally implicate yourself in something you didn't do.
Jeffrey's story, I remember he was 16. They brought him like away from home. He didn't know where he was going. They hooked him up to a lie detector to test, and then they grilled him to the point where he was like in tears and basically said, "Tell them what they want to hear, and you can go home." So he told them what they wanted to hear, crumbled up into like the fetal position and started crying because he was so exhausted from being grilled about like this murder that he didn't commit that he confessed out of wanting to go home.
Yep.
So much pressure. I mean, when he went back and sued them, that was one of the things he sued them for. They didn't do the interrogation correctly or fairly or in a way that was, right.
Yeah.
It was torture for a child. And he was a child. He was underage.
Right. Well, and the inspiring part now is just like you're doing, somebody like Jeffrey and these other folks who've been wrongfully convicted, they get together and they share each other's stories. And now he's an attorney, right? He's practicing, does
Yeah.
mostly pro bono work and helps. Like it's just
So
crazy.
badass. So
Yeah.
Jeff was like, he gets out and, he, like, the world is different, like social media, texting. Like, he was in jail for 20 something years. He gets out, the world's all different. He decides to go back to school, and that wasn't an easy journey, but he goes back to school, he might have gotten his college degree in prison, but he wants to go be a lawyer. He applies to law school, doesn't get in, applies again. He knocks the interview out of the park. He gets into law school so that he could be the one helping people. And I think he started his foundation prior to becoming a lawyer. And his foundation helps wrongfully convicted people, but he wanted to be the one in the seat making the arguments, because that was his passion. And it's just so there's no other word for me except, like, it's so badass. Like, it's so like, screw all you guys, I'm coming back and I'm freeing us all.
Well, that's what you did. You did the same thing, right? I mean, just in
Yeah,
a different
trying
context.
to.
And I mean, that's what's cool. So I don't want to keep you forever, and I want to make sure people know. We mentioned the book and your subscription, a service, and I know we have a lot of people as well that just struggle with storytelling or public speaking. And that's another just huge benefit of being with a community, to be able to get feedback and write a letter or read poetry and talk to each other and get some feedback. So what are the best ways for people to get connected with you and learn more about the Unsealed?
Yeah, theunsealed.com. Just Google The Unsealed, it'll come up, or theunsealed.com, or at the.unsealed on Instagram, The Unsealed on Twitter or X. But yeah, I mean, and if you go to contact on our website, it goes right to me, or the little message box, like, that goes to my phone too. So I'm, like, the easiest person to find and connect to. But yeah, theunsealed.com. We have tons of stories. You can write your own story, come on our shows. If you are following on our newsletters, we announce, hey, tonight we have an open mic, or tonight we have a story writing challenge due, and so we'll keep you posted that way too. So yeah, check me out there.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. We'll put the link in the show notes as well, so if people are looking for it. And then we wrap up every episode. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
If people just they're listening, they're driving, they're focused, I'm sure, but what's one last takeaway? If you want somebody to leave this conversation with you thinking one last thing, what's the one piece of information that you want them to?
Whatever hurts you in life doesn't have to hold you back. Follow your heart, go for your dreams, take a chance, and just give it your all.
Yeah, I love it. And you have shown in so many different capacities and verticals how that impacts everybody in a different way. So I think that's just such a cool platform that you've got. So it's a perfect
Thank you, and thank you
takeaway.
for your interest in talking about it, and thank you for buying the book. I so appreciate that.
It's
And
good, and I
10%
will tell people
charity.
I didn't buy it because she told me to. I bought it because I was interested, and then it was
Well, I
one of
probably
those.
did tell you too, because I'm very
Right,
aggressive.
I wasn't gonna admit to anything, um, but it's one of these that I started reading, and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And when you start to see, like, the real genuine story behind why people are they are, how certain things impact, or honestly the relatability of what other people have gone through, is just powerful. So it's hard to put down, and
Yeah.
it's simple to read because it's small, short letters from different perspectives. So
Yeah.
I recommend it.
It's funny, I was not somebody who liked to read, like, long books, and then I write a 450-page book, but it's because I like the short stories. I put a lot of short stories on there.
Yeah, it reminds me very much of the chicken soup books.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people have said,
Yeah,
like, modern day chicken soup for the
yeah,
soul.
it's perfect.
Yeah,
It's perfect. Well,
thank
thank
you.
everybody for listening, and thank you so much for spending some time with me today, Lauren.
Thanks for having me.
Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And to keep this conversation going, follow the Truth Be Told podcast on LinkedIn and Truth Be Told CFI on Twitter. On behalf of the International Association of Interviewers, Rick Lander-Zalowski, and our valued sponsors, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast.